The following podcast is a Scrum Inc. production.
Hi, I'm JJ Sutherland. I'm the CEO of Scrum Inc., and welcome to our new podcast, The Agile CEO. I get asked a lot, what is next for Agile? Don't we need something new? Isn't Agile dead? I'm serious. And I often, am baffled by that because I often think, we don't need new laws of thermodynamics. We don't need new laws of motion. Force equals mass times acceleration 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, today. It's just the same. Agility is based on science that goes back 100 years, and it works. And what it's really about is this inspect and adapt cycle. How can you make a hypothesis about what you think is going to happen, and then you test it to see if that is true? It's a scientific method. But in this changing world that changes so fast, how can we accelerate that? And Scrum and Agile are the ways that we can do that at the organizational level. We want to have an organizational level of agility. We want an agile operating model. So it's not just your teams, it's your organization itself that you're leading or you aspire to lead that can move from one state to the other in response to change. One of the places where some of the real fundamental ideas come from is empirical process control. Now, this comes out of the chemical industry. It was developed mainly by Dow Chemical, because one of the problems with the chemical industry is sometimes you put together reagent A and then reagent B and you get reagent C. That just happens. Every single time, it's predictable. But a lot of the time, maybe there's a slightly different condition. Maybe there's a slightly different temperature. Maybe there's a slightly different humidity. Something is different. And you put together reagent A and you put together reagent B, and it blows up some of the time. And so what Dow Chemical did is they started saying, we have to inspect and adapt. We have to constantly be measuring, getting new information about the state of what's happening in their chemical processing. And that's really the root of Agile. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. And in certain ways, we don't know what's happening right now. The only way we can find out is to test it, to see what reality is. I've been writing a new version of the classic book that came out about 10 years ago, Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. And what I've found is that while the Agile doesn't change, the basic way Scrum works doesn't change, context does change. And when my father and I first wrote the book 10 years ago, one of our goals was to show how Scrum is a universal human accelerant based in science, based in this is just what works. This is the commonalities how the great teams and great organizations work. Our goal was to make it easy to read, told in narrative form, and to give people a good grounding in simply how to do Scrum. But after the book was published, one thing that happened, which surprised me, was that people kept on asking me, how do you know some of this? And I said, don't you read the footnotes? Because I cite every source. And then the other thing that happened when we started thinking about 10th anniversary editions, because when the first book was published, all of a sudden, people started calling me. People in all sorts of domains, banks, military, government, rocket ships, medical devices, all sorts of people. And they all said something very similar, which was reading this book was a light bulb moment for me, where why can't we change how we work? I often say to people at Scrum Inc., and they say, well, what do you do when you go and consult with leadership teams across the planet? And I say, my entire job is asking two questions. I'll sit down with a leader and they'll say, well, my organization does this. It's hard to do that. We're slow. We can't adjust. And to leaders, I always say, the first thing is, how's that working for you? And they say, we can't change. It's too hard. We're too set in our ways. and yet we can't get the results we want. And I said, how's that working for you? And then I say, you're leaders. And the second question I ask is, why is that okay? Because things don't have to be that way. Now, one of the ways that Agile is different in different contexts is if you're doing really different things. Like one of our clients builds cruise missiles. Another of our clients builds musical streaming services. Now, their tolerance for error is very, very different. Yet they use the same Agile principles in the same way. Their definition of done might be different. They might really be concerned about regulatory. Like if you're building implantable medical devices, you really got to be careful that you don't kill people. And so over the past couple of years, in preparation for thinking about the book, which my father and I sat down, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago and said, should we do an updated version? People would approach this by doing. So we figured at first, okay, we'll write a new introduction, maybe an afterword, but the book still works. It's a good book and things in it are true. But as we started looking through it, we said, maybe there's a new way to show this truth. Maybe we should tell some of these stories that we've interacted with, over the past 10 years, these leaders who had that light bulb moment that they've worked with and that they've driven change, not just for individual teams, but for organizations. We talk a lot about these days is organizational agility. What's an agile operating model? How are you going to work differently, not just yourself, not just your team, but your organization? And I realized I really wanted to share those stories. And things have changed a little bit. Not, again, with Agile so much, but the world. As we saw during the pandemic, things can change overnight, dramatically. And during the pandemic, the leaders I worked with a lot, the ones who had embraced Agile ways of thinking, Agile ways of working, were able to adapt to that change much more quickly than those who hadn't. And sometimes that was tragic. As we said in the first book, it really is simple at one level. Change or die. And we've seen giant organizations that we thought would never, ever go away, just vanish. One example, Credit Suisse, once, I think, probably the largest bank on the planet, trillions of dollars in intervention, gone. This happens. And one of the things I want to do with this podcast, and what I wanted to do in the new book, is show you how it doesn't have to happen, how you can make your organization future-proof. And it's not like you do an Agile transformation. Okay, everyone's doing Scrum teams. We're done with the transformation. It's not an endpoint. It's a constant. Because things do change so rapidly, you need an organization that can change in response. It's really kind of that simple. Agile in your context is going to look different. One of the organizations that I write about in the book is the Royal Navy. Which is, the UK Royal Navy has been around for some 500 years. I think it was started by Henry VIII. Now, that kind of organization is half a millennium old. But they know, I speak to leaders of the Royal Navy, and they've told me if they don't change how they work, they will not be able to provide the Navy the nation needs in the future. That's a big deal. And they've said the way we are working, the way we have worked, the way we actually kind of think is a law of gravity isn't going to work anymore because it's not working for them. And they've decided it isn't okay. The other thing I want to talk about is technological change, and especially just in the past year or so, is artificial intelligence. Now, this is a revolutionary technology. Believe me, I'm a skeptic, and I talk to a lot of my buddies who are big data guys or large language model people, and they told me for, 15, 20 years, we're not going to have artificial intelligence, we're not going to have general intelligence, we're not, it's just, maybe not. Over the past 18 months, those conversations have changed. They say, it is coming, it is here, things are different. And one of the things that people tell me, and in my experience as well, is that to take advantage of these new technologies, to take advantage of artificial intelligence, Scrum teams, Agile ways of thinking, Agile ways of working are critical because you have to learn to work with a new companion, a new team member. I'll just tell one story that I included in the new book, which is maybe a dozen years ago, 12 years, 10 years ago, Garry Kasparov, the great Russian chess master, he said, listen, we know computers are better than any human will ever be at chess. Like your phone could beat the greatest chess master of all time, hands down. So in most places, say, okay, we're going to have these tournaments, only humans can play. But Kasparov had the idea, well, what if we just opened it up? Let's just see what happens. Let's let supercomputers compete against other supercomputers, against grandmasters, maybe teams of grandmasters, maybe grandmasters working with supercomputers. And they wanted to see what drove the best results, what drove victory. And what it wasn't any of those grandmasters. It wasn't any of those supercomputers. It was two guys with a laptop. And what Kasparov says, it wasn't better humans. And it wasn't better machines. It's humans plus machines plus a better process. It's working with the machines. That is what's going to do it. And to do that, you have to have this rapid feedback loop because things are changing so fast. And you have to work with the artificial intelligences to pair with them, to become team members with them. And I've seen a lot of AI out there doing a lot of crazy things. Some of it you really do want humans in the loop for some of these decisions, but they need to react quickly and they need to evolve quickly because they are changing. And another thing that people ask me all the time is why do so many of these agile transformations fail? Because they do. What is the commonality? And there are a few reasons, but the biggest one is leadership. If leaders don't embrace agile ways of thinking, if they don't demonstrate agile ways of working, and they don't change their behavior and vision, their organizations won't change. I see it a lot where some leaders will say, okay, hey, you guys down there, you go agile, and I'm just going to maintain working the same way. That doesn't work. And leaders across the planet are realizing there's really a generational shift that's happening in the leadership of large organizations, small organizations. And this just happens every decade or two where, a new group of people with new experiences come into leadership roles. And I talked to a lot of them over the years about how they're approaching the need for an agile organization. And so what I wanted to do in this podcast series was to share those stories with you because I want to share the experiences and the knowledge and how they actually did it. I'm a radical pragmatist. Whatever works. And I want to share that pragmatism with you. This isn't about theory. Sure, there's some theory. It isn't about, in a perfect world, this would happen in a utopian world. This is about the brass tacks. This is about what people actually did, how people did things like the Sentinel Project for the FBI. That was in the original book. And I went back to Jeff Johnson, who's going to be on this podcast in a few episodes, and I said, what did you do? What did you learn? How did you actually do it? I got really more in depth with him about some of the lessons he learned in his reflections 10 years on. So that's a great episode, recorded already. Jeff Johnson, one of my favorite people, really interesting. I talked with people who are doing things in the military, in clothing, in all these things. And they really had, just like with Agile, there are certain fundamentals that don't change. Like in the chapter that I wrote about the Royal Navy, I paired it with a conversation I had with Brad Freitag, who is the CEO of Claire's. It's a technology company, Sunnyvale, Silicon Valley. And the thing is, the issues that the Royal Navy is struggling with are exactly the same as the issues that Brad is struggling with in a Silicon Valley company. So I sat down with them and said, what did you actually do? Not what did you think about doing? what did you actually do? Because remember, it's inspect and adapt. And that's sort of the purpose of this podcast series, as well as the purpose of Agile, is let's see what happened when they did something. Not when they thought about doing something, not when they described something they were going to do. It's when the rubber hit the road. We're also going to spend an episode talking with my father, who has been deep into AI, going back decades, back to Stanford's AI lab in the early 70s, and how that AI training, and one of the things he talks about is how he was doing AI simulations of cancer when he was a medical school professor, really affected how he thought about Scrum and some of the first principles of Scrum, how things work. One of them, one thing is that it's called the Bayesian surprise, which is a great name. And what the Bayesian surprise is the cost when you don't do something right, when you don't finish a job, when you drop the ball. Getting back to doing it right, getting back to finishing things has a huge mental cost. It's just like I did write about context switching in the first book. And that is exactly the same thing. When you move from one thing to the other, you pay a mental tax. And again, this is science. They put people in fMRI machines and shown this to be true. This is how brains work. So I wanted to share some of those things. I really also wanted to share with you and share with everybody the opportunity to hear from people in senior leadership positions, often in the C-suite, and how they view the world and how they see the need for change. The other thing we're going to talk about in this podcast series is how do you do Agile in a highly regulated, highly secure environment like the military or medical devices, I was saying earlier, things where if there are mistakes, it is really bad. But again, the key Agile principles are the same. To know if a mistake is being made, to know if you're running a risk, you have to try something and see what happens. And embracing Agile ways of working and really changing your entire future as an organization, as a leader, as a team member is a risk. But Agile makes it actually a little less risky. A few years back, a mentor of mine, this guy named Daryl Rigby, his partner at Bain, was telling me the story where he was working with a big department store. And they had put, $100 million aside to do a big digital transformation, omni-channel thing. And they started working on it. They put together Agile teams to do it. And about 2 months in, the leaders of those Agile teams went to the leadership of the organization and said, you know what? We're approaching this entirely the wrong way. We don't have the skill sets we need on the teams. We need different approach to this technological thing. And leadership, which had put $100 million aside for this, said, thanks, you just saved me $95 million because we can stop. And that's one of the things that is often hard for these organizations to do. I'm sure you might have had this experience. Someone put, in the annual budget, they put $100 million for this, program. And you know what? The leader of that program does not want to say, we shouldn't spend all $100 million. But Agile allows it to de-risk. You're only experimenting for a few sprints to see what happens. And you're always guessing that you're doing the right project, that you're approaching it the right way, that it's actually what people want. So you have this hypothesis that you have to test. It's the scientific method. And that's why when people ask me, so is Agile dead? I'm like, is science dead? It's not. It's you have a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis. The faster you can do that, the faster you can change, you can pivot, you can decide to do something else. It's all about reducing the cost of changing your mind. That's it. Really, how do we make changing your mind in the light of new evidence, in the light of new events, that what we thought would happen is not actually what did happen? As I said, I'm a radical pragmatist. I want to see what actually happens, not what we imagine will happen. So this is the Agile CEO. I'll be your host, JJ Sutherland, CEO of Scrum Inc. Thrilled to have you along on this journey where you're going to learn a lot. I'm going to learn a lot. We're going to hear about how these leaders actually did it and how you can take what they did, the lessons they learned, and apply it in your life, in your organization. And hey, as my father says often, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. See you next episode.
The Agile CEO is brought to you by Scrum Inc. In today's fast-paced world, adaptability is key. Our expert consulting services tailor transformations that drive measurable success, creating resilient, high-performing organizations. Whether you're leading a team, managing an organization, or guiding enterprise-level change, we're here to support your journey. Transform with confidence and achieve the outcomes that matter. Learn more at scruminc.com.